My name is Evie and I'm on the analytics team at Grailed. And today we're going to be talking about how to build a marketing attribution data model in DBT. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation, I just want to quickly set the stage. So what is Grailed and why is marketing attribution important for us? So Grailed, for those of y'all who are unfamiliar, is the largest online marketplace to buy and sell menswear. Attribution became really important for us as we started to grow our marketing team last year and thus increase the number of marketing channels that we had. Yes, attribution is super important when you have paid marketing channels in the mix, but for us, it was really great to just better understand the majority of our user base who are acquired organically. This work becomes even more impactful when you add LTV to the mix. So of course, knowing where your users come from, super great, but knowing the value that those users add and contribute to your business on a long-term basis at the marketing channel level is even more powerful. So just to give you a little bit of evidence of how our marketing attribution models have benefited our marketing team, here's a little update from our SEM manager during one of our old all hands slides. And they expressed that attribution has enhanced their ability to accurately report SEM performance and forecast growth. So hopefully after this presentation, you can pick up some tips and tricks on how to build your own attribution model and then see an update very similar to this one in your next all hands meeting. Alrighty, so how did we build marketing attribution in DBT? Well, we essentially needed three things. One, we needed clean event data with as many not null UTM values. Two, we needed a way to make anonymous users not anonymous. And three, we needed a method or rule for giving credit to channels. So let's start off with the first one, clean event data with as many not null UTM values. So I know all of you are probably thinking, Evie, how do I get clean event data? That is like the number one question that I have for myself whenever I endeavor on any type of project like this. And your goal essentially here is to capture or use events where you're likely to find some sweet UTM values. And those UTM values are going to come from any tracking links that your marketing team has used and has in the wild. Maybe it's on your team's Instagram bio, or it's in your team's paid search campaigns. You get the picture. And if you're anything like Grailed, you'll probably want to capture and use things like a segment page event. And so let's just go ahead and take a look at what this would look like in action. Hopefully y'all can still see this, but I am on the Grailed Instagram page on my desktop. And there's this really cool tool called Link in Bio where you can look at all the content that Grailed has on their Instagram grid and then see the content that you can link out to. And I see this picture of Jonah Hill and I'm very interested. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And that sends me to this really cool piece of editorial by our dry clean only blog. And I can go into this Chrome extension called the segment debugger, I believe, or event tracker, which gives me information on all the events that fire just by me simply clicking on that link. And the event that we're interested in here is this page event. And if I click on that, I can see all the different event properties that get passed when I open that link. And these are the event properties that are super important to us, right? These are all of our UTM values. So let's go back into the presentation and just take a look at what that data would actually look like, right? So now we know what those page events look like in the wild, but what are they going to look like when they land in your data warehouse? And so this gives you a little bit of an idea as to what those page view events would look like. I bet you your table will probably have way more columns than this, but this is just a little bit of a taste of what that might look like. You'll have, your anonymous IDs, your user IDs. Some of your user IDs will probably be null, right? Because there are going to be some users who come in, they don't have an account. And I'll definitely guarantee that there's going to be a lot of page view events that don't have refer information, UTM source information, et cetera. And that's because, your traffic might be direct. So in those cases, we don't have any referring domain information that we can leverage. So now that we know what that page data I'm talking about looks like, what do I do with all this data? What do you do with all this data? So first you want to build your event stream, and then you want to translate those UTMs into marketing channels. So let's take a look at the first piece. So building your event stream. you want to use that page data that we were just talking about and only select the columns that you need. So maybe you want to clean up the column names. It really depends on your preference here. But the real goal here is to filter out any of the rows where you're not going to have any null UTM values or referring domains, right? You just want to grab the page view events where you have some marketing information. And that's important because you want to be able to translate those UTMs into marketing channels. You could certainly use these page view events as they are and give your marketing channel, your marketing team access to this data in its most raw format, but it might be difficult in like a BI tool context. Maybe you're using Looker or Tableau and your marketing channel owner is saying, hey, like how have our paid channels been performing? It might be difficult for them to kind of filter down to understand, oh, okay, I need to filter for this particular UTM source or this particular UTM medium. So it's great to kind of integrate this into your DBT layer so that you can essentially bucket certain page view events and those event properties into a marketing channel like organic social or paid search. This is also another great opportunity to get your stakeholders involved and give your marketing team a chance to say, oh, okay, I understand how my work impacts your work, the data team. Alrighty, so let's move on to the second component, a way to make anonymous users not anonymous. So I know a lot of you are thinking, okay, well, how do I do that? Well, great question. You've come to the right place. Essentially, your goal here is to determine a way to get every single anonymous ID associated with a user ID. Of course, this is never going to be perfect, right? There are definitely cases where a user comes to your site and then they never come back. They never create an account. And in those cases, that anonymous ID will never have a user ID associated with it. And if you're anything like us at Grailed, you'll probably use something like Segment Identify. So if you were looking at the quick Instagram demo that I did a couple minutes ago, you might have seen that identify event fire. And that identify event fire is essentially whenever we're trying to identify who that person is, right? So we're trying to figure out, does this person have an account? Does this person not have an account? So now that we know what that event would look like, this is what it potentially would look like once it's loaded into your data warehouse, right? So each row in this particular picture that I have here would represent an identifies event. So we have our anonymous ID, we have our user ID. There's a case where we have some null user IDs. That's okay. Maybe we have some user properties in there with username, etc. So now that we know what this looks like, okay, well, now what do I do with all of these data? Great question. So we have step number one, we want to map each user ID to their anonymous IDs. And step number two, add your user IDs to your event stream. So let's talk about step number one. We know what our identify events look like, but from that event, you want to create a table where all of your anonymous IDs that were ever associated with some user ID is associated with a user ID, right? So, and a great way to test that this table is doing exactly what you want it to do is to make sure that the concatenation of anonymous ID and user ID is unique. I think it's really important here to point out that there are definitely limitations to this approach, right? There's a world where maybe you live in a household in which you share a device with another person. And in that case, one anonymous ID is going to be associated with two user IDs, okay? But of course, nothing is ever going to be perfect. We just got to do what we can with what we have. Okay, and then step number two, add your user IDs to your event stream. So great, now you have this table that you've created, right? Just as a reminder, your table has all the anonymous IDs that were ever associated with some user ID. And then you also have your event stream that we built in step one, or in section one of this presentation. And your goal here is essentially to add user ID to that event stream. So now you have these two tables and you're like, okay, how do I add user ID? All you have to do is join these tables together using anonymous ID as your joining mechanism. And a great way to test that this table is behaving as expected is that user ID is never going to be null in this table. All right. So the last component, a method or a rule for giving credit to channels. And before we dive into like, how do I actually put this into practice? Let's just define what we mean by attribution model, not to be confused with attribution data model. So attribution model is defined as a method that your team uses to determine which channel ultimately receives credit for driving a user acquisition, an order, an app install, essentially any conversion that you're interested in. And so as an example, Google Analytics uses last touch non-direct as its default attribution model, but there are a lot of other attribution models out there. And this is a great opportunity to chat with your marketing stakeholders and be like, hey, what do you think makes the most sense for our business? What do you think makes the most sense for our marketing team? Okay, so how do you apply this method? 2 steps. Number one, only consider events that happen prior to conversion, right? Any event that's happening after a conversion isn't going to be relevant in terms of understanding, okay, what drove this specific conversion. And then number two, isolate the event or events that drove the conversion. Okay, so only considering events that happen prior to your conversion. So now you have this event stream with your user ID in Great. Let's say you want to attribute something like user sign up or user creation. You probably have that data lying around in your data warehouse, right? You probably have a sign up event associated with a user ID. So because you have an event stream with not null user IDs for all of your events, you can essentially attach or add your sign up timestamp to that event stream. And the way that you do that is joining that on user ID. And now that you have that perfect table, the next step is to figure out, okay, what of these events are not important to me and what of these events are important to me? And the events that are not important to you are the events that happen after the time of the conversion. So in this example, we know that we can cut the first row, right? Because the event timestamp that's happening for this event is happening on April 14th, 2020. But we know this user signed up on December 31st, 2019. So we're saying, okay, this event is not relevant in terms of answering the question, what drove this user sign up? You might want to incorporate an end day look back window, meaning maybe you're only interested in the events that happen set within 7 days of the sign up or 30 days within the sign up. Another great opportunity to talk to your stakeholders and say, hey, what do you think makes sense for us here? Yeah, alrighty. And then the very, very last step, isolating the event or events that drove the conversion. So let's just use last touch as an attribution model just for demonstration purposes and only focus on this fake user that I've created. So in this example that we have here, we know that our user signed up on March 5th, 2020, and we also only have the events that happened prior to the sign up, right? We're seeing that in the leftmost column, timestamp is March 3rd, March 4th, and then March 4th again, right? So we're in good shape. Now we're trying to figure out, all right, well, which one of these channels drove this user sign up? And we know that it's the last row, right? Because the timestamp of that event is the closest to the sign up timestamp. So said differently, we want to grab the event where the event timestamp, the distance between the event timestamp is the smallest to the sign up timestamp relative to all the other events that belong to that user. Okay, so just to quickly recap, there were 3 things that we needed to build our attribution data models. One was clean event data with as many not null UTM values. 2, a way to make anonymous users not anonymous. And then 3, a rule for giving credit to channels. And 1 and 2, when combined, create that non-anonymous event stream where all of your events have marketing information. And number 3 provides a way to grab the event or the events from the not anonymous event stream, ultimately allowing you to attribute certain conversions to a specific marketing channel or marketing channels. A few parting thoughts before we leave today. What did we achieve with this project? Definitely have a better understanding of who our users are, which of them are most valuable, where to continue focusing our efforts, where should we continue putting our dollars towards, etc. How long did this project take? This project took roughly half a year to get right. But once we had the approach, attributing other conversions like orders and app installs became super easy. What were some of the lessons that we learned? I think 2 big lessons here. 1, definitely get your stakeholders involved early and often if possible. And then number 2, with any model, just recognize that there are always going to be limitations and then plan to make enhancements, make improvements in the future, in future quarter planning, etc., which will just keep everyone happy and sane. So there was a question. Claire's writing to me now. Earlier, you talked about LTV as being a big component of this. Have you experimented with different ways of modeling LTV in SQL? Yes, we have. We have done this. Actually, this is a project that our analytics team was working on this past, we go by trimesters. This past trimester, I would be more than happy. I think that a couple of my teammates are probably watching this stream. So I'm sure that they could definitely give you way more information in the Slack channel as well.
Okay, sorry about that. I was trying to come back on stage. I've already said this once today. We'll edit that part out in post, so don't worry too much about it. Yeah, we have a few minutes, so do you mind if we just go through a few of the questions that came up?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So how do you handle the user to anon IDs when there are many user IDs for one anonymous ID? So you kind of talked about like that real life example of sharing a computer and, those sorts of like, you just sort of know it's never going to be perfect. Do you just have a heuristic that you go by in that case?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually in our DBT modeling, we've excluded any cases where we see more than one user ID associated with an anonymous ID. So we actually, I think, have like a DBT test set up to make sure that that table is behaving the way we want it to. So that's how we currently have it handled. I'm sure in the future, there's potentially a more sophisticated way of handling that, but I currently don't know one.
All good. Yeah, I think if you're in the chat and you have another way of handling that, like definitely reach out. It's a thing that, I think you just have to accept you're never going to get right, and good enough is close enough.
Totally.
Another question from the chat is, like many teams start out using Google Analytics, and that's probably the right answer for a small team. When is it worth investing in bringing this attribution modeling in-house?
That's a great question. Well, so we also used Google Analytics prior. I think that it probably makes sense to start building something in-house as your team gets bigger, especially once you are investing in paid channels. I think that when you're investing in paid channels and you have more than one paid channel in the mix, you definitely want to have a little more control over things like attribution, things like incrementality, which isn't something that we talked about here. I know that's something that our growth marketing team is definitely focusing on, but I would heavily recommend that building an attribution model in-house gives you that level of control that you wouldn't necessarily have with just a Google Analytics solution. And you should probably try to invest in something like an in-house attribution solution once you start ramping up your paid marketing spend.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And another question, does Grailed do any out-of-home advertising? I think in Australia we call it above-the-line advertising as well. And if so, how do you add that to the mix for attribution?
Yeah, that's a great question. So currently Grailed does not, to my knowledge, and marketing team who is somewhere, I think they're watching this, please back me up, but I don't believe we have any out-of-home advertising. But I do know that it's actually not that difficult to attribute out-of-home campaigns. An example of that would be the use of promo codes, if that's something that your team does or something that your business does, or using like a special landing page URL. There are ways around it, but we just don't do that at Grailed currently.
Yeah, I think from my experience, definitely like having that first marketing attribution model in place and understanding like, these UTM tags are just so important to the attribution. Like we need to make sure that we get this right before we go and spend millions of dollars on an ad, like a TV ad campaign. So yes, I agree with that. Like building the attribution model in-house first before doing the out of home is a good move to make sure that you have the data quality there.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. One more question. It's a bit contentious, and it's actually from our head of growth. Debates on first touch versus last touch attribution. I think you mentioned that you go with last touch attribution. Do you know why your team chose that?
Yeah, I wish I had a really good answer, but just to give you a little more context on what our team does. So we actually do have a version of, or we use a version of last touch non-direct, very similar to how Google Analytics does it. But we do use what we've called last touch ranked non-direct. meaning certain channels that our marketing team put a lot of effort towards get a higher ranking than something like, say, referral social. Because referral social, there's no real effort that the marketing team can take in order to like make it go up or down, right? Referral social is like a person, I don't know, maybe sharing a link to a listing that they found on Grailed to a friend of theirs through SMS texting, just as an example. And so, in terms of that specific model, we've definitely built our attribution model so that our marketing team has a better understanding of, okay, this is the specific effort that I have as a channel owner have put behind my marketing channel to drive this sign up or to drive this order. So hopefully that kind of helps. I know that doesn't really speak to like first touch versus last touch, but that's the thinking behind why we've done this last touched ranked non-direct attribution model.
Nice. Yeah, my coworker Drew has said in the chat, he runs 3 different methods and then just chooses the one that makes his numbers look the best, which we aren't doing any paid advertising, so I definitely know that he's joking at that point. But yeah, we've seen some marketing teams, especially like, one team the team that's focusing on out of home will use one method, and the team
Right.
that's doing SEO will focus on another. I definitely think avoid that, choose one, stick with it.
Yes.
And yeah, I really love the sound of this last touch ranked